Welcome back to my channel. This video is going to be a little bit different than my previous videos. In this video, I'm going to focus on three main areas: how to airbrush your model, how to weather your model, and how to finish your model. This was a requested video from a lot of modelers that wanted me to focus mostly on the painting, finishing aspect of model building and not the building itself. So I'm going to focus on those areas instead of the actual build of the kit. This is a little bit of a long video, so hang in there. Hopefully you will learn a lot. I do want to mention before I start, I sound funny, and it may be a little bit hard to understand me. I just recently had major dental surgery and have about 16 implants in my mouth right now, so it's a little difficult for me to talk and not sound like Daffy Duck. So just bear with me on that. For black basing, I'm going to start off with light gray on the underside. And the reason I'm doing this is Navy Skyraiders, the underside was insignia white. So if I black base with white underneath, there's no point as I'll be airbrushing white on top of it. The light gray will help me get a different variation. Black basing is pretty easy. I'm using a cheat method here. I'm just using templates. I find it easier. I don't need to spend time. Just change the direction of the template several times and airbrush, and you will get a very nice mottling effect, and that's what you're going for here. So as you can see, I'm moving the template around, I'm airbrushing, and it's not a neat process, so don't worry about that. Don't worry about neatness right now. That is not something to be concerned with, because you're going to cover this up and it's going to look really good once it's covered up, because the more random the effect, the better the effect will look, which is kind of counterintuitive, but that is how it works. So I'm just going around various parts and just black basing here with the light gray. Now I should mention, I mentioned this in a video before, black basing gives a very nice visual finish, and that's why I like it. But as far as realistic, I don't think black basing is the most realistic weathering method. In my opinion, pre-shading is the most realistic weathering method, because I work with airplanes, and I work with government airplanes, and I work with private airplanes, and in our hangar I see them every day for several years, and pre-shading is the most common way of weathering I see on them. That doesn't mean that there isn't some that look like they've been black based, it's just pre-shading is the most common, however. So I think pre-shading is far more realistic than black basing, but black basing gives a really nice, beautiful finish. And here is the result of the black basing underneath. As you can see, very nice. It comes out very, very nice, and it will be very visually stunning once you get the main camo on there. For the top side, I'm going to do pretty much the exact same thing, except I'm using white. Because for the top side, the camo color is light gold gray, so I can use white. Going to do the same procedure, same PSI, same thinning ratio as listed above, and just going to go in and change the direction of the template consistently. Again, you don't need to be neat with this process. The more random, the better looking it will be. You don't want it to be uniform. Now, I should mention black basing. There's different ways to do black basing. One is by hand, and you go in very small areas using your airbrush. It creates a different effect because you're controlling the black basing, so it's a much smaller pattern. My personal thing is, I think that takes too long, and I don't think it gives enough juice to warrant it. I can get the same effect just using a template, and the template saves time. I just go in there, I just blast the paint on, as you can see right there, and that's it. So I would rather just use a template. I think it's far easier. Now, another thing I want to mention about black basing, I solely see this in the aircraft modeling community. Not in the tank modeling community, sci-fi, I see a little bit. Definitely not in the car modeling community or the figure modeling community or anything like that. So this is definitely more of a technique that I only see really and only used by aircraft modelers. Time to paint white. And this is where I think a lot of my fellow modelers have problems for some reason. So I'm going to try to explain this and demystify it as best as I can. As you notice, I've already black based, and I've already, and the black is obviously the primer. So I'm going to come in with a light coat. And the reason I'm coming in with the light coat is I want to build up the white. I am not trying to override the black basting I did. Because there would be no point if I'm just going to blast it all with white. So I'm coming in with thin layers. You don't have to do this. Once it's primed, you can come in with a little bit of heavier paint and go ahead and airbrush it. But what you want to do is you want to airbrush it wet. This is key. You don't want to come in high air pressure and greedy. You want it to come in wet. And with my thinner mixture, if you keep moving your airbrush and come in with the wet coat, it's going to self-level out and it's going to cover, and it's going to be really, really nice. So if you notice, my PSI is low, my paint is thinned well. I'm using a small needle nozzle here, and I'm moving the airbrush. I keep it moving because it's very thin paint, and I'm controlling the airflow. And notice I'm close to the model. I'm about 3 to 4 centimeters. I'm not 5 to 6 inches, which people recommend. I've never understand that. Your paint is going to go on gritty if you do that. So you want to be about 3 to 4 centimeters, and keep the airbrush moving. Keep it moving, light, wet coat, and build up the effect that you're happy with. You can also come in with a heavier coat if you're not trying to build up the effect and you just want to blast on white. But white isn't that hard. I've shown it several times now, so hopefully it makes a little bit more sense. As you can see, it's really nice coverage with the Insignia white. It's a very lovely color in my opinion. With the top side, I'm doing the exact same method that I did with the white. I'm coming in with a very thin coat, low air pressure, 3 to 4 centimeters away, and I'm building up the paint. And I don't want to cover all the black basing, so I'm doing several layers. And this is one of the good things I like about acrylics. Because you can dilute acrylics, they will not cover as fast as enamels or lacquers, so you can really control the effect of the paint and control how you want the paint to look. So I really do like that about acrylics. As you can see on the tail here, I'm building up. I don't know how well you can see on camera, but the black basing is still showing underneath. It just looks more covered than it is. But on this wing, as you can see, I'm coming in, I'm building it up till I'm happy with it. So I really do like that about acrylics. And that's the way to do this, because again, you're not trying to cover the black basing. There's no point if you just want to blast on the paint and cover all of the black basing. You just did that for nothing then. And it won't really create that nice vivid effect if you cover all the black basing. So I'm coming in with the paint here. I'm gonna keep going until I'm happy, cover all the areas. Nothing too Nothing too fancy here, just keep it moving, keep it going. As you can see, the wetness of the paint. Hopefully that comes through on the camera here as I'm airbrushing. Should mention that this is not my favorite scheme. Personally, I like the C camo that the Air Force used. And I did a Skyraider with that camo many years ago, and unfortunately my brother broke that model when he dropped it, but that was a much better scheme in my opinion than the Navy had. I don't really like the Navy gold gray white underneath look. I don't know. I mean, maybe it worked, although they've abandoned, so maybe it didn't work. Very curious to learn about why they abandoned it. I want to talk about airbrushing camo. There are two types of camo. Well, they're defined into two categories. Hard edge, like this blue Arctic F-16, where the edge of the camo is very, very hard. You can see it was done with tape or whatever it was. And then you have soft edge, and I don't like the word soft edge. The British say diffuse, and I think that's a much better. As you can see, it's very hard, but it's not as hard as that line. You can see there's a little bit of overspray, etc., and it's not as precise as the hard edge camo. And this would be the diffuse style. Now diffuse style can be even more diffuse than this, but this is an example I found on the web. So let's say you have to airbrush a camo scheme that is more of the diffuse style. Well, what I wanted to show here is how you can do it just using an airbrush without having to mask. And what you want to do is you want to use low air pressure, heavily thin paint, and you can come in and create fine lines where the camo separation will be, and then build up the paint. And this way you can airbrush camo freehand, the diffuse style, without having to mask, without having to do all of that extra work. And the results will look gorgeous, because when you do get this right, you get your airbrush in that sweet spot, you're not going to get in very little overspray. The line is going to be very, very tight, so it's going to look like you used some sort of template like blue tack or something, but you just did it freehand, and you can do an entire kit this way. I've done C camo this way, the Southeast Asian on like F105s and stuff this way, and it looks fantastic, and people think I used the template or something to airbrush it. No, I just went in freehand because I know how to control my airbrush. And if you learn how to control your airbrush at low pressure with thin paint, you can get the same results. Now you can go in more heavy-handed once you're further away from the separation line between the two camo colors. Now here on the top of the cowling, I'm going more heavy-handed and covering the paint. Remember, your paint is very thin, so you don't want to blast it on or you're going to get an orange peel effect. But you can build it in faster, and it's going to look great. It's going to look fantastic. It's going to, like the rest of the kit, you can't tell the difference. This is why airbrush, it just provides you a level of it's a tool that just provides you so much control, so much ability to make some amazing work. So if you keep looking on the cowling, you can see it looks like it's perfect almost. There's no overspray. There's going to be very little overspray when you do this with low PSI and very thin paint. Just make sure to control it and not blast it on, or it will orange peel. There you go. Now I'm going to airbrush a little of that third cowling wing, whatever you want to call it. And I later learned that was incorrect. So I had to go back in and airbrush white over that, and I did it without masking. Look at that. Looks great. Looks great. For the anti-glare panel on the Skyraider, I'm going to come in with RML 66. I'm not going to use a straight black because a straight black would be too stark on a model this size. So when I use an intermediate black like RML 66, which is more of a gray black, and pretty much standard procedure, just, you know, thin it out 50-50 to 1820 psi, and just go nice and easy, 3 to 4 centimeters from the kit. Build up the paint, never blast it on. Okay, now I'm going to come in and try to fade out some of the nose cowling, and because that's where the sunlight hits and the paint's going to fade and it's going to be a little bit more worn out. So I'm coming in with a light gray, heavily thin, low air pressure, and I'm just hitting some of the panel lines, not all of them. I want to keep this random, so some of the panel lines I'm going to fade out a little bit more than others, just to kind of give it variation and not look monotone. So I am going to bleach some of the paint here, and I'm coming in with thin paint, fairly low air pressure, and just hitting some of the panel lines and some of the in between some of the smaller panels. And the reason I'm bleaching the paint is I'm going to do this aircraft in VA52 markings, and when I looked up this particular aircraft, I was able to find pictures. It was not a heavily weathered aircraft, but it did have bleaching more towards the inner side of the wing, towards the fuselage, and a little bit on the fuselage. So I'm going to go in and bleach some of the paint. Hopefully you can see it on the video here, but in particular the bleaching, there was a lot more bleaching where the wing fold section was, so I'm focusing around that area a little bit more. But overall, it was not a heavily weathered airplane. And some of the Skyraiders, towards the inside of the wings, you can see discoloration spots. I think those are oil stains and people walking on them. This aircraft did not seem to have that, just seemed to have a lot of bleaching on the wing, on the inner side of the wings, and that's it. So when I just bleached some of the areas there that I saw on the photo, and it was really more focused on the panel lines, so that's where I'm focusing the bleaching here. As I mentioned, I am going to do this aircraft in the markings of VA52, and there is a blue band on the aircraft fuselage. Tamiya provides you a decal for that blue band. However, that blue color is also on the tip of the tailplane, but they don't provide a decal for that. So you have to mix your own paint. It's something you should get very comfortable with when modeling, is mixing paints to get the right color. In this case, I tested it out and I found that if I added in 80% Russian blue to 20% French blue and mix it together, I get the right color. Now, when you're mixing colors, always put the thinner mixture in first, because you don't want the paint to dry and you want it to keep it moist. But as you can see, it's a fairly close representation. When you're doing airbrushing small parts like this, always use a little placard or something to create a barrier on the backside so there's no overspray on other parts. And go lower pressure, nice and easy, and build up the paint. You don't want to blast it on, you don't want overspray, you don't want, because especially I'm not masking everything off here, I want to go in nice little gentle circular motion and very close to the model, and just build up the paint nicely. And by the way, you have to build up the paint, because the more I build it up, the more it's going to look like the color. So as you can see, it's going in, making sure with the placard I don't overspray onto the other parts of the kit. I am going to gloss coat my model. Gloss coating has become kind of a controversial subject in the modeling world. Some people recommend it and some people are absolutely against it. Now, I'm for it, obviously. I've made a video as to why I'm for it, and there's several reasons why I say you should gloss coat your model. In particular, for this kit, why I would recommend gloss coating your model is because of the decals. The decals on this kit are some of the worst I've ever worked with. I don't know why, but Tamiya can never get good decals down. I don't understand it. So, in order for the decals to blend into the kit, it's good to gloss coat because it creates a extra layer that helps blend them in. And that's why I'm going to be gloss coating my model. And I also see gloss coating as insurance against weathering. So here's the aftermath of the gloss coat. It looks shiny, but it's not that shiny. AK Gauzy Agent is not a very shiny gloss coat, but it is one of the strongest gloss coats that I know of. Time for the decals, and as I've already mentioned, Tamiya has some of the worst decals I've ever seen. I don't know why. They make amazing model airplanes, amazing tanks, but they have some of the worst decals. I don't know why they can't up their decal game. To deal with difficult decals, my procedures are, I dip the decal in boiling hot water. I've noticed that boiling hot water really helps soften the decal. And this is key because these thick decals, these really bad decals, they need to be softened first before you can get them to do what you want. And so the first step is you have to soften the carrier liquid, and you can only do that by really hot water, not lukewarm water, but like seriously hot water. And then I'm going to use microset and water to help align the decal into place. Now the thing about microset is it's really important in this step. Microset helps glue the decal, but it also helps the decal conform, and this is so important with difficult or horrendous decals. It's like a softening agent for the decals. It's not a setting solution. It doesn't, melt the decal, but it helps it conform. And so you have to do that step, or it's not going to conform properly and it's going to look thick and it's just not gonna get into the panel lines like you want it to. So we'll use water and microset and gently move the decal into place till I'm happy, as you can see here. And once I've got it into place, I'm gonna add in a little bit more microset just to help it along, and come in with cotton bud or Q-tip, however you want to call it, and remove some of the moisture, and then apply a little bit more microset on top to help the decal conform, and then I'll let it sit. And that's the key, just let it sit for a while and you'll notice it'll conform into the panel lines. And once it's done that, and I can start seeing that it's starting to conform into the panel lines, that's when I'm going to come in with my setting solution. The setting solution really is meant to melt the decals into place, but you have to get to this point with bad decals. You can't just go in and expect it to melt because they're so thick and they will not bend that it's just not going to work. So you have to take these extra steps. So now that the decals are on, and I've used a ton of setting solution to try to get them to conform, what I'm trying to do in this step is add another layer of gloss coat to hide the decal carrier film. On terrible decals like this helps quite a bit. It will really help hide that carrier film. Now, if these were good decals like Eagle Strike or aftermarket company of some kind, you don't need to do this actually. So it's only really when these are really tough decals like these Tamiya decals that you want to do this step to kind of hide that carrier film. So I'm going to go over these really terrible decal carrier films, about 2 or 3 layers, and help blend that in a little bit. For the weathering, I'm going to keep this pretty simple. As you can see, I've already weathered one side of the airplane, and the other side I'm going to remove the weathering wash. And for this particular airplane, I decided to use the Ultimate Weathering Wash Light Dirt. I didn't want to use the dark dirt because it just stood out too much. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, looking at pictures of this aircraft, it was not that dirty. I don't know why. I don't know if this just didn't get used as much, or just kept it clean, but it was not as dirty as other Skyraiders. I want to show 2 things here. I want to show the contrast if you use water or if you moisten the paper towel with just a little bit using your tongue or such. If you use water, it removes about 95% of the wash and just leaves it in the panel lines. If you use just a slightly moistened paper towel, it reduces about 90% and it leaves a little grimy look on the paint, which can be really nice if you want to do armor or maybe a dirtier aircraft. But just keep that in mind. You can achieve a different effect using water or just slightly moistening the paper towel. And in this case, as I've already mentioned, it was not that dirty of an airplane, it was not that grimy of an airplane, so I'm using water to remove most of the wash and just really turn it into a pin wash. And one thing I love about clay washes, Ultimate Weathering Model Wash and Flooring Model Washes are clay washes, is you can put the wash on over a gloss coat and leave it for a year and come back and it will still come off that easy because it's clay. That's it. You can't do this with an acrylic wash. They will set immediately, so you have to work really fast with acrylic. And with oil sometimes, with enamel sometimes, they won't come off after a while. So you do have to be careful with that. But with clay washes, it doesn't matter. It gives you a lot of time to work the wash and remove it. Alright, the wash is off, everything is clean, and now it's time to add in the flat coat. Now, I'm going to use Vallejo Premium Flat Coat. I personally like the flat coat from Vallejo because it's not a dead flat. I don't want a dead flat after I've done all this work, and realistically, most airplanes are not dead flat. Tanks are, modern tanks especially, they're dead flat, but airplanes are typically not a dead flat color. So I really like the Vallejo Premium because it's not a dead flat. And it's pretty easy to apply. I just stand at 50-50 and shoot it at 15 psi using my 0.2 millimeter needle nozzle setup. And I do about 2-3 light coats. And it goes on pretty nicely. It airbrushes nicely. You do have to give it a good solid 24 hours to dry before it can be fully handled and things like that. So just be careful of that. You gotta make sure to give it that full 24 hours to fully cure. Other than that, great wash overall. Exhaust stains are probably one of my favorite parts of the weathering process. And so here I'm using Vallejo Model Color Smoke, heavily thinned at 80-20, and I'm using a 0.2 millimeter nozzle at 10 psi. I'm going in and just lightly airbrushing and building up. You don't want to go in heavy, you want to build up and follow the pattern. Look at reference photos to see how the smoke, the exhaust stains went on the real airplane. On this particular airplane, they were not that heavy. Now on some Skyraiders, they were incredibly heavy. So just be aware what, make sure you have reference photos for the particular aircraft you're building. Now, gonna build up the effect slowly, but while I love the smoke color, that is not the only color in exhaust stains. That's just the first color. Usually exhaust stains have a reddish brownish towards the outside and black color on the inside. So I'm going to come in first with the smoke, lay down the overall pattern of the exhaust stains, and then I'm going to come in with black and in the middle areas darken up the exhaust stains. So you can see, it looks very nice so far. As I mentioned, the interior of the exhaust stains typically are darker black colors. So I'm going to come in with Vallejo Model Color Black, heavily thinned again, and just darken up the insides. I'm not trying to cover up all of that smoke color. I'm just trying to make it darker on the inside like it is on real exhaust stains on airplanes. So here I'm aiming for the middle, going in gently, very thin, and building up the effect. You don't want to overdo this. Once you do it right, it looks really, really nice. Notice the difference from the top exhaust stain and the bottom one. And as you get further away from the exhaust, the black kind of subsides a little bit. It's more of a smoke color. So focus the black more towards the beginning of the exhaust location into the middle, but don't go all the way to the end, because most exhaust stains aren't like that. They're usually a different dark brownish shade towards the end, but darker at the beginning. It's coming along really nicely. I really love doing exhaust stains. I think they're a lot of fun. And it's best to do exhaust stains on a flat coat, because if you try to airbrush on a gloss coat, the paint is going to spread out because it has nothing to grab onto and it's on a glossy surface, so it's going to spread out like it's wet, and you're going to get like a runny effect, and that's not what you want. There we go. Really looking nicely there.